hey, when this releases, it's going to be Mother's Day. What about Mother's Day? What is important about Mother's Day? 1980, I wasn't born yet. But in 1980, just a few months before I was born in December, so almost at the time I was conceived, to be quite honest, was Mother's Day. Mother's Day 1980, Lonnie Frisbee, the guy from Jesus People, came to John Wimber's church, and the Holy Spirit fell. What came out of it was the Vineyard Movement that just touched people's lives, and it was just a phenomenal movement, you know, and God moved, and God moved, and God moved. But it all started on Mother's Day 1980. I find it interesting that Mother's Day 1980 was when the Vineyard started, which led into Toronto in the 90s. It was Father's Day 1995 that Brownsville broke out. We'll talk about Brownsville on Father's Day. But let's talk about the Vineyard. This was just a phenomenal move of God that broke out, and they were at the time Calvary Chapel. And so, you know, Calvary Chapel was this kind of expository preaching. It was, you know, Chuck Smith had basically backslidden out of the Pentecostal movement. He used to be Foursquare. And so, and then you had this Calvary Chapel over here that was just experiencing miracles and signs and wonders and prophecy and words of knowledge that were happening with Lonnie Frisbee that kind of got the whole Calvary Chapel thing going as well. So, I mean, it was just a phenomenal time. The Vineyard exploded in the early 80s. And in the late 80s, and then Mike Bickle comes into the situation. And, you know, you got what the quote-unquote KC prophets involved. I mean, it was just a really phenomenal. You can read a book. It's called The Quest for the Radical Middle by Bill Jackson. Outlines the whole Vineyard movement. Really good history book. Interestingly, in December 1995, it takes a huge transition to basically a denominational report. But that's a different discussion. So, on this Mother's Day, I want to think about Lonnie Frisbee, and I want to think about how the Vineyard movement began, because it all came out of a Mother's Day morning service that went on and on and on all day, and God just touched people's lives like never before. People were changed in ways that they hadn't been changed. The Vineyard really got set on course all the way up to 1995, and then we all know what happened there. So, what do we learn? First of all, I think it's interesting that it started with Lonnie Frisbee. Lonnie Frisbee was a guy that had a lot of struggles. He had a lot of personal issues that he had to overcome. He, we all know the story. He died of AIDS. It is what it is. He had his struggles. He had his concerns. He had his moral problems, but God used him powerfully. God does not always check to make sure that we got all of our quote-unquote character in focus before God says, I'm going to use them. Sometimes God uses the people we wouldn't think God would use, and God doesn't use the people we think He would use. You know, and that's just kind of interesting. You know, kind of like God uses women, as uncomfortable as that is. So, you know, I mean, that's the story of Lonnie Frisbee. Guy struggled. I mean, he had real struggles. Came out of a homosexual lifestyle, the whole thing. God used him powerfully. He went to Africa, had amazing stuff happen in Africa, comes back and does amazing things. You know, and even right before he died, God was still using him, and he died in 1993. So, you know, I mean, just awesome. You know, and then John Wimber. John Wimber, you know, didn't try and build a big ministry. He just tried to say, hey, let's do this thing together. Let's raise up an army of people that can say, you know, and let them be anointed to do the work of the ministry. You know, and that's what he based it on Ephesians 4. Awesome. You know, so just, I guess that's really kind of my thoughts on Mother's Day 1980. Think about it. Think about how God moved, and you know, we need another move of God like they had Mother's Day 1980, and that really was the beginning of what ultimately accumulated on in January 1994 in Toronto, which became known as the quote-unquote Toronto Blessing. And you know, that was just kind of, everything led up to that. And then of course in December 1995, John Wimber did what he did, and no one really understands that. Anyways, I'm out of here. See ya.